Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week, I'm joined by costume designer Deborah Scott, whose work includes The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Legends of the Fall, and more recently, Avatar: The Way of Water, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I have to ask because so when I think about Avatar, I think about people wearing those costumes with the little balls on it. But you did the costume design. So how did that work in Avatar?
So complicated. I think all people think that, right? They think if it's a motion capture, or in this case, a performance capture film, we tend to think of people running around in crazy unitards with markers and head rig and all that other thing. But the truth is that all of those characters, once they're finished performing or during their performance, have to be transferred to a visual element. And again, people make the assumption that that's done by the production designers or a VFX team. And it is to some extent. I mean, there's incredibly talented VFX artists, but we design and made every single costume, prop, accessory, wig, all of it. And then we hand that over to them. And what that does is a couple of things, is that it gives them a level to ascribe to. In other words, it better look as good when you're done as it does when I've made it. So then they do their wizardry, right? They scan it. They use we shoot incredible amounts of motion tests, underwater, in wind, all sorts of different things in order for them to get motion simulation, animation, because again, these garments, for the most part, unless you're talking about our uniforms or things like that, they're very one-of-a-kind, bespoke, unique pieces. So the computer programs not only don't know how to draw them, they don't know how to make them move, because they don't understand quite what it is until they're handed it.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
It does. It sounds like a crazy amount of work.
It's an enormous amount of work. It's very multifaceted, because you design on paper, you make in real life, 3D,
Yeah.
and then there's the whole post process, which is quite lengthy. And luckily, Jim Cameron and John Lando both know how important this is to the end result of the filmmaking, because you want the characters that the 3D is so immersive, right? That you need to know as a viewer, if you're looking at it, that you literally could reach out and touch it and know what it is. Mm-hmm. So it's so tactile that it's incredibly important to go through this process.
I'm going to interrupt this interview for 1 second. We want to thank PixelView, one of our sponsors. They're a streaming solution for filmmakers. PixelView lets you stream your work to remote clients for easy collaboration, and it works with both on-set teams and post-production teams. With built-in video chat, you can discuss and make changes in real time and stream directly from your editing software. Or you can use the hardware encoder to stream from DaVinci Resolve or the camera on set. See the promo code and the link in the video description below. So I want to step back then, because you worked on the first Avatar and on this Avatar, and I'm wondering, when you get the script, what did you pull from the script to start designing the look and the feel for this one?
Well, luckily, like you said, we had the template from the first movie in terms of this alien species, this clan of people. In that one, it was only one clan, right? And we understood them to be forest people. We understood a few things about them. My job on this film was twofold. One was to flesh out that clan, that it had been now years later. Jake and Neytiri are parents, they have children, there are children involved, which we never had in film one. So to sort of flesh that out and take it further, develop develop all these new characters with the visual narrative of their clothing. And then secondly, the new clan, which is the Wētã, the clan that lives on the ocean, was to design that whole new thing. So in doing that, the script obviously tells us that they live on the ocean, that they're basically a peaceful people who don't want to join in and take up arms. There's very little else in descriptions about what they do or where, we know when they draw and they have knives. We know how they interact with their clothing per se. And that's why when I started to design it and just being able and allowed to design these characters top to toe, meaning hairstyle, body art, all the costumes, so that you really have a chance to invest in the clan development and the character development. So it was just, opening a door to Jim's imagination, kind of, jumping on through and really getting to just explore our world as a touchstone, the world that we know on Earth, all the peoples that live in our world, all the island peoples all over the world, and then kind of focus in on the things that Jim wanted.
So I have two questions from that, but the first one that sort of popped in my head when you were talking about top to toe, the Na'vi are not the same proportions as humans, right? Like they're sort of taller and lankier. So how did you design for that with that in mind? So that, because obviously when you're doing the tests and stuff, it's going to be regular people wearing it. Right. So how do you design for that?
Well, we started designing. It's interesting that you say that, because it's such a twofold, hand-in-hand experience. Because as we started to design on paper, right, or in our case, in a computer, a lot of photo artists work that way now, and they had not yet developed the actual bodies of the characters. So it was kind of a guessing game at first, right? We knew Jake and Neytiri. We had to alter them a little bit for some age requirements. We sort of guessed at ages of children. So we started kind of laying it out. And then as we went through our process of designing costumes, the character people were busy doing their part. But so that would come much later. And we knew that the Wētã people were also going to be basically of the same height, right, and kind of stature, but they had physical differences. They had thicker necks and broader tails and different colored eyes and things like that. Well, that all developed as we went along. So as we got more information, we would update our artwork to reflect that. Sometimes our artwork came first. So if I put a hairstyle in for a particular character, they would follow that. When Jim approved that, they would then follow that template in their character build. The challenge of the human to Na'vi relationship, because you can't build, there's no point of building it in Na'vi scale, right? We did sometimes for live action reference shooting, where you'd have a real character, spider, grabbing onto something of a Na'vi character, and it had to be exploded. So we'd have to make it quite big. But in general, the costumes were made all to human scale so that the human actors could wear them, like you said. And the challenge then is, as it goes through the digital process, that we had to work with, and that's why the post part of it is it's a lot of work and takes a long time. But what you're in essence doing is doing virtual fittings. You're doing the same kind that you would do in a dressing room with an actor, but you're doing it with these computer artists as they develop a turntable in 3D, and you're looking at back, front, side. You're commenting on the fit, the color, the way it drapes. It needs to be longer. It's not big enough, so it was all those adjustments to fit the body. And then on top of that, we went really heavily into the materials, the weight, how it blew in the wind, how it floated underwater. And we did a lot of extensive testing so that we could inform the animators and the simulators.
It's very fascinating.
It's so complex. And I mean,
it's yeah.
it's a whole new costume design world, you
So
know.
you're pioneering the workflow for future comment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to work in this way. I think Avatar is so cutting edge and so far ahead of everyone else that it really is it's just, so for students of costume design coming into the field now, it's a lot of new things to learn. So, not just how to design a character or what fabrics to pick or how to build something or how to work on a set. It's also then how do you understand what the digital artists do so that you can direct and inform them.
Well, and it's interesting because like I feel badly almost for the schools because it's probably so hard because it's, they're going to have to somehow show them to work with visual effects artists, which I don't know many, costume or design schools like that would have a VFX department,
Yeah,
to contact.
it's hard. I think there's very few schools. I came up in the theater world, right? So that's how I learned, and then transferred my schools to movie making. I think there are not even that many theater, costume theater departments that talk with their film departments. So that's, UCLA does have crossover now, for instance, but a lot of these schools, that's the first step. And then the second step is, maybe it's guest lectures, maybe it's different kind, just information pouring down to people, but also on a professional level, us as, like, for instance, now I have a certain amount of expertise in this area, I can pass it along to others.
I want to jump back because I said I had two things that sort of popped into my head when you were talking initially. The other is you talked about like researching the different Aboriginal groups around the world. Was there a particular one that you guys sort of focused on, or James Cameron became focused on, that you guys utilized?
Was that the end of the question? Sorry, I
Yeah,
jumped.
sorry.
I was like, no, I think we mostly what I did first was to do the entire world, islands off of China, India, Arctic, all, to see what were some of the rules per se of different clans. And you find out a lot of things. You find that people that, and especially these people who live on or near the water, which was our new task. Jim kind of ended up settling and concentrating in sort of greater Polynesia, which includes Hawaii, which includes New Zealand, where we shot, which includes, Samoa, Fiji, the Cook Islands. It's the entire huge French Polynesia, all these different cultures. Very, we sometimes think, oh, they're kind of the same, but they're actually not at all. Some, they have links, but they're very different one to the next. Now, having said that, he settled down there because, for one thing, Pandora is a hot moon. It's not a planet. I always say planet, but it's actually a moon. And the temperature is warm. So let's just take that for granted that we're not going to be shooting in the Arctic. So let's narrow down a little bit. He also really wanted these very much, and you find this as a similarity through most of those islands, that the predominant hair color is black. The predominant hair type is curly. And that, you see it a lot in the movie where, all these luscious curls and how beautiful they look flowing through the water. So we started to narrow in there, but we never specifically landed on one culture or another.
Well, is there like, because the thing that I always find interesting, because like I don't, like, I took home ec, so I learned a bit about sewing, not enough, but like I'm always like, oh, I should have kept going to learn to make clothes, because you see something in a different culture and you're like, that's really cool. Was there something that because in this situation, you might not have seen these different cultures before, is there something that you discovered in there that you personally are like, oh, that's really neat, I want to use that later for something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned that the value of the handicrafts, our Na'vi people and many people around the world don't have sewing machines, or didn't, hundreds of years ago. So what does that mean? How do you stitch things together? How do you make a cloth? How do you knot leather? How do you tool leather? How do you use, it's mostly the way in which, for me, the biggest eye opener, and I think the thing that I carry with me, is twofold. One is the things in your environment that you can use to make a decorative garment to wear is immense. Like looking outside your window, there's pine trees. You could go out there, you could get some of those pine needles. You could figure out a way to weave them together and make something incredible, right?
Yeah. My wife, if I did that, she'd be like, why'd you destroy the tree?
I expect that on your next assignment.
Yeah,
So you understand what I'm saying. So it opens your mind to the beauty of nature and how we can use it. And then secondly, just I think the knowledge that if you can think it up, if you can dream it up, and I mean in that way, the collective we, in terms of my whole crew, all the people that worked for me, the many, many talented people, if you can think it up, you can figure out a way to make it. And sometimes that requires advanced technology like 3D printing, you know, but nature is the touchstone, is the guide. And that really became hyper-focused for me.
Have you been using 3D in your creations?
Yeah, we did use some 3D printing. We found that it was very, very helpful when you were trying to make something that you couldn't otherwise make, or more importantly, that was very little. For instance, like if you're trying to make a giant tooth, you could carve it, right? We ended up carving a lot, but you can also 3D print it as long as 3D printing is incredible, but it also, there's some not so great things about it. It's, you know, how you paint it. How do you make it look really real? If you have a 3D printed bone next to a real bone, or, you know, a fossil, it's you know, that's a whole other jump of artistic endeavor to get there. So, but it was extremely helpful. Sometimes I can think of some of the garments, and one being a skirt of Kate Winslet's Renal character that had some shells on it that I collected from the beach. And they're very faint purple. And I brought them back to workshop and I said, okay, I'm going to put these on the skirt, but I also want to incorporate something alien in here. I want a different shape, a coral that doesn't look like a coral that we see, that we know. It has to be pale lavender. You know, here's all the specifics. And so that we could print them and stick them in there with the real items and make something that looks quite natural.
Yeah, well, and just thinking, like you said, there's essentially a lot of make it look real, like you said. Now, I'm wondering, you know, we talked about looking at the script, but, you know, like when you start talking to the actors and getting them all sort of set up, they're going to start bringing in like how they interpret the characters. So how did you get anything in particular from them, or did they influence you in your design in any way?
That's a really good question. I think it was quite a dialogue. I think that for someone like Sam Worthington, who plays Jake, he's sort of been that character, as well as Zoe had, right? They've been that character. They knew what to expect in a way. So once they got the information of a design on paper, it was very easy for them to understand it and assimilate it, and, you know, possibly put something on to understand the weight or the flow of a garment, but they understood the concept. It was more difficult working with although amazingly open-minded children. Like, here, okay, kids, you gotta run around like, so we spent a few days, maybe a week of them. They had to learn a lot of moves. They had to learn parkour, but they also learned, here's what it feels like to run around with a tail, a loincloth. When you jump down, when you squat down, this is how it's gonna feel and look. And we would often put, especially with the children, put reference pieces on them, because they had to continually be reminded, more than an adult would, that this is what they were dealing with. Bare feet, you know, necklaces that might move around, things like that. So in answer to your question too, like someone like, for example, Sigourney was very, very, her character, Kiri, is very, very attuned to nature. She picks up on all these vibes. She's very much of a collector. That's how I saw her. I saw her as a girl that was enchanted by her environment and would sort of walk through, pick little things up, decorate herself with them. And that's how she was in touch with nature. And Sigourney was absolutely like that. She would come up to my workshop and wander around and pick up things and look at, and I'd say, oh, I was making this for you. I was making this little, and it absolutely, I hope, and I think opened her mind, like to the wonder of it, right? That these beautiful things were real and they were beautiful in real life. So, that there's nothing replaces that for many people, that kind of tactile thing. You can look at something and say that's pretty, but I find too with all of my samples, once they would get on mannequins, you said like you wanted to be like a museum, like don't touch it. It's cost so much money to make. But when people would wander through, their innate thing was to touch. Like, what is that? Because touch really, really helps our understanding. And I think in a garment and therefore in a costume, and then for an actor, they're so linked.
What would you say, like, is there a particular costume that was difficult to sort of come to fruition or come to its final form that you are really proud of the outcome of it though?
Yeah, I think I've said this before, and I've thought a lot about it. There were a lot of challenges, of course, trying to get things that to work and look beautiful underwater. All that stuff was hard. But the piece that I thought was, for me, was the most elusive and incredibly important story-wise. So that was like two things coming together that was like, it's like when Neytiri at the beginning of the movie, after their idyllic kind of everything's so great on Pandora, and then boom, they have to go back to being warriors. And Jim really wanted, one of the things we kind of established clan-wise, that the women of stature and warriors would have these kind of high-necked things. I set off on doing a lot of ideas about which would end up being the sort of bone piece, chest piece with the leaves that come out of the sides. And somehow I knew I wanted it to be skeletal. I wanted it to be light, but fierce. It had all these things that it had to be in my mind. Drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing. And then we started to experiment with, okay, if it was drawn like that, but how do we make it? How do we get it to hold together? First one, too clunky, too awkward, doesn't fit right. So again, a movie of this kind of length, and because you're dealing with virtual artists, eventually you can buy time. So about the third or fourth go around, I said, okay, this is a problem because it never looked as delicate as I wanted it to. Yet it had to represent all this strength. It had to be a warrior chess piece, but feminine. And so finally, the design got almost there on paper. And then I'm like, okay, well, this is going to be impossible to make, which again, we tried a few times, but eventually we ended up 3D printing the bones. They were very delicately put together and then very delicately woven together. And then the leaf portions were probably the easiest because I think they were mostly made out of fabric, but there were other things in there as well, beading and other things. But the structure of that skeletal piece was quite delicate, and it would, if it's treated too roughly, it does break. It'll crack because 3D, I don't know if how many people have worked in 3D plastics, but they get that fine and they're not super strong. So it's been a challenge. We've, nursed that thing. It's in good shape, but it was quite the journey. And then just getting to that point where it's like, is it going to be too fragile for anyone to wear? And we got through that part. So it exists. And I love the way it looks on her. I think it's an important character and story moment. And that's why I feel most proud of it.
Now, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Okay, well, there's a genre. There's a genre.
Yeah.
My genre for guilty pleasure television viewing, and it can be an absolute binge fest, is medical dramas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because for a couple of reasons. One is I love watching them, the doctors all work as a team. You know, that kind of
Yeah.
team effort is really inspiring to me. And sad things do happen, and I'm a very sensitive, emotional person, so I appreciate that. But for the most part, things really work out at the end. So after your 48 minutes or 54 minutes or whatever it's like, the doctors found the solution. The person was cured. It's just restorative for me. So that's it.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you very much for being interested.
Well, that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at Filmmaker or on Twitter at Filmmaker_U. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.